It all began with a letter. A plain white envelope slipped under my door one morning, stamped with a seal of the Homeowners Association. Inside, a single sheet of paper declared that my fence violated aesthetic standards. No warning, no discussion, just a fine. I stood in my driveway staring at that wooden fence. Weathered, yes. Old, sure. But ugly? No. It was strong, sturdy, and had been part property for years before I even moved in. The HOA claimed the color didn't match the neighborhood palette. I had painted it a soft gray, neutral and calm, but apparently the board's vision demanded something different. It wasn't the fine that stung, it was a principle. I paid my dues every month, followed the rules, and maintained my property. Yet somehow, my fence had become public enemy number one. And at the center of it all was the HOA president, Mr. Daniels, a man who wore power like a badge, patrolling the neighborhood as if it were his kingdom. He had built a reputation for nitpicking the smallest details, handing out fines for grass an inch too high or flower pots placed a foot too far from a doorway. Neighbors whispered about him, but most never fought back. The hassle, the paperwork, the endless meetings. People gave in rather than challenge him. But I wasn't built that way. I tried reason first. I called the HOA office, left messages, even attended a board meeting. Daniels never budged. His answer was always the same: repaint the fence or keep paying. At one meeting, he even smirked while reading my violation out loud, as if enjoying the spectacle. That's when something inside me shifted. I realized this wasn't about my fence at all. It was about control. Daniels thrived on making examples out of people. My fence was just the latest excuse. So I decided if he wanted to make me an example, I would become one, but not in the way he expected. For weeks, I thought about what to do. Paying the fine felt like surrender. Repainting felt worse, an admission that he was right. I wanted something that would turn the tables, something that would leave Daniels wishing he'd never written that notice in the first place. And then it hit me. If Daniels was so obsessed with how my fence looked, then I would make it impossible for him to ignore. I would give him exactly what he wanted. Attention. Not by removing my gray fence, but by turning it into a canvas with his face. The idea started as a joke in my head, but the longer I pictured it, the more I knew it was a perfect response. Painting Daniel's face across the very fence he hated would be bold, defiant, and unforgettable. It wasn't just rebellion, it was art. I started researching murals, watching videos, and sketching designs. I wasn't a professional artist, but I had enough skill to pull it off. I found a local supply store, picked up buckets of paint, brushes, and rollers, and waited for the weekend. That Friday night, I stood in front of the fence, brushes ready, imagining Daniel's expression when he saw his likeness staring back at him. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing him that homeowners weren't powerless. By sunrise, I dipped my brush into the paint and pressed it against the wood. Stroke by stroke, the fence transformed. Slowly, a face began to emerge, his face. And with every brushstroke, I could feel the balance of power shifting. This wasn't just a fence anymore. It was a statement. But I had no idea how explosive that statement was about to become. By the time the weekend ended, the mural was complete. The once plain gray fence now carried a bold, colorful likeness of HOA President Daniels. His sharp jawline, his neatly combed hair, and that familiar smug smirk, all captured in paint for the entire neighborhood to see. At first, I thought it might go unnoticed. Maybe a few curious glances from neighbors walking their dogs or a passing car slowing down. But I underestimated the power of spectacle. By Monday morning, the mural had become the talk of the street. Neighbors stopped in front of my house, whispering, pointing, and then laughing. Some pulled out their phones, snapping pictures. By the afternoon, my fence was trending on the neighborhood's Facebook group. The comments piled in, some outraged, most amused. "Is that Daniels?" one comment read. "Finally, someone stood up to him," said another. "Best fence I've ever seen," wrote a third. Kids riding their bikes slowed down to stare. Even people from other streets drove by just to catch a glimpse. My fence had gone from an HOA violation to the neighborhood's newest attraction. And the best part? Daniels hadn't seen it yet. Word spread fast, though, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he showed up. I pictured him storming down the sidewalk, veins bulging, fists clenched, demanding I remove it immediately. That image alone was enough to make me smile. But it wasn't just about Daniels anymore. Something unexpected was happening. The mural was giving people courage. My neighbors, who had quietly endured fines and warnings for years, were suddenly inspired. They saw that standing up to the HOA wasn't impossible. It could even be funny. One neighbor told me she was thinking about planting sunflowers, even though the HOA banned unapproved vegetation. Another joked about hanging a giant inflatable flamingo in her yard. For the first time, people were talking not about how to avoid trouble, but how to push back. That week, I noticed more small acts of rebellion. A house down the street painted their garage door a shade darker than approved beige. Another neighbor left his trash bins visible an extra day past collection. They weren't big moves, but they were deliberate. The mural had started something. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed quiet. Too quiet. He hadn't come by, hadn't called, hadn't left a letter, but I knew him well enough to know silence wasn't surrender. He was waiting, planning his response. And then it happened. One evening, just after sunset, I caught sight of him. Daniels walked past my house slowly, hands clasped behind his back like a general inspecting his troops. He stopped at the fence, stared at the mural for a long moment, then shook his head and walked away. No words, no confrontation, just silence. But the silence was heavier than any shouting match. The next morning, a new envelope appeared in my mailbox. Another violation notice. This one didn't mention the original fine. Instead, it accused me of defacement of property and warned of escalating penalties if the mural wasn't removed. I read it twice, then laughed. The mural wasn't going anywhere, and the more Daniels tried to erase it, the bigger the story would become. Because now it wasn't just my fight. The whole neighborhood was watching, and Daniels had no idea just how much that spotlight was about to burn. The letters kept coming. At first, I thought Daniel's initial violation notice was just bluster, a scare tactic he'd forget about once the laughter died down. But by the end of the week, my mailbox looked like a war zone. 3 more envelopes, each thicker and more threatening than the last. The fines escalated, the language hardened. Words like defacement of property, legal liability, and immediate compliance required jumped off the page. And tucked at the bottom of one letter was the HOA's favorite weapon, a threat of placing a lien on my home if I refused to pay. That was Daniel's playbook. Crush people under the weight of paperwork until they caved. He wasn't just trying to erase my mural. He was trying to break me. But I refused to be broken. Every morning, I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching neighbors pass by. Without fail, at least one person slowed down to admire the fence. Some chuckled. Others snapped photos. A few gave me a discreet thumbs up when they thought no one was watching. It was subtle, but it meant everything. And then came the turning point. One Saturday, I woke up to the sound of laughter outside. Peeking through the blinds, I saw a group of kids on their bikes gathered around the mural. They were pointing, giggling, and daring each other to pose for photos in front of it. Parents stood nearby, smiling. It hit me then. The mural wasn't just a jab at Daniels anymore. It was becoming part of the neighborhood's identity. My fence had gone from non-compliant to a landmark. Daniels, of course, despised it. The following week, the HOA newsletter landed in every mailbox. In bold black letters across the first page, Daniels had written an article titled, "Preserving the Integrity of Our Community." He didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who he was targeting. He warned of acts of defiance that threatened to undermine the neighborhood's reputation. He painted a picture of chaos, as if my painted fence was the first domino in the collapse of civilization. But instead of scaring people, his words only fueled the fire. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with comments. Some mocked the newsletter, posting memes of Daniel's face superimposed on famous paintings. Others rallied behind me, calling my mural the best thing that's happened to this neighborhood in years. Even people who normally avoided conflict started chiming in, emboldened by the absurdity of it all. And something incredible began to happen. Small acts of rebellion started sprouting up like weeds. One house down the street painted their garage door a shade darker than the approved beige. Another neighbor left their trash bins visible for 2 days past collection, daring Daniels to issue a violation. Someone even planted a row of unapproved sunflowers along their walkway, bright, defiant, and impossible to miss. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate. And every single one was a message. We've had enough. It all came to a head at the next HOA meeting. Normally, meetings were quiet affairs. Half-empty rooms filled with yawns, budget updates, and occasional complaint about pool hours. But this time, the community center overflowed. Every chair was taken. People stood along the walls, crowded in the back, even spilling into the hallway. Daniels walked in late, carrying himself like a man about to deliver a sermon. His gavel slammed against the table, demanding attention. But unlike before, the room didn't fall silent. The air was charged, restless. He tried to stick to the agenda, rattling off pool maintenance costs and landscaping schedules. No one cared. Murmurs filled the room until someone finally stood up. Enough about the budget, the man said. We need to talk about the fence. The words cracked the dam. Voices rose, louder and louder. One neighbor recounted how Daniels fined him for a hairline crack in his driveway. Another shared how her children's swing set had been labeled a safety hazard and ordered dismantled. An elderly couple described being threatened over a wreath on their front door. For the first time in years, the room wasn't afraid. It was angry. Daniels tried to cut people off, waving his gavel like a weapon. Out of order, he barked. But no one listened. The crowd had found its voice, and they weren't giving it back. Then, a quiet man in the back of the room rose to his feet. He wasn't someone who normally spoke. People turned, surprised, as he raised his phone high for everyone to see. On the screen was a photo of my mural. Bright, bold, undeniable. Daniel's painted face stared out across the room, frozen in that smug expression. This, the man said, his voice steady, isn't vandalism. It's a mirror. It shows us exactly what this neighborhood has become, and we're tired of it. For a heartbeat, silence hung in the air. Then the room erupted. Applause thundered against the walls. Laughter bubbled up, loud and defiant. Some even whistled, cheering like they were at a rally instead of a homeowners meeting. Daniel slammed his gavel, so hard the handle snapped. His face turned red, his voice drowned out by the roar of the crowd. For the first time, he wasn't in control. His authority was slipping through his fingers, and everyone could see it. And in that moment, I knew, no matter how many fines he issued, no matter how many threats he SCR-deabled onto paper, the mural had already won. It wasn't just my fence anymore. It was the neighborhood's rallying cry. As I walked home that night, the cool evening air buzzed with the voices of neighbors finally unafraid to speak. I looked at the mural and smiled. Daniel's painted face stared back at me, powerless now against the tide of resistance he had created. The power struggle had begun, and for the first time in years, Daniels wasn't the one holding the leash.